She mocked him, skipped him during service, then slapped him in front of everyone, unaware the quiet black man in seat 2C was actually the CEO of the airline. "Excuse me, miss, would you mind giving me a hand with this?" Leonard Mayfield stood beneath the overhead compartment, a sleek navy duffel in his grip. His voice was soft, his tone polite. He didn't look like someone who couldn't handle his own bag. But after 3 back-to-back meetings and a tight connection at Love Field, his left shoulder was stiff. It wasn't much, just a simple ask. The flight attendant, a slim woman with sharp cheekbones and tightly pulled-back blonde hair, glanced over. Her name tag read Kendra. She didn't smile. She didn't even pause. She scanned Leonard from head to toe with a look that said more than any words. "You people always want something," she muttered under her breath, though loud enough for the passenger in seat 2A to turn his head. Leonard blinked. Not because he was surprised. He wasn't. Not really. At 65, he'd had his share of these moments. On the outside, he looked like someone you'd find chatting in a quiet cafe. Tailored charcoal sweater, pressed khakis, wire rim glasses, hair neatly trimmed with streaks of grey. Nothing flashy, nothing loud, just composed. But behind those eyes was a man with stories. A man who'd flown F-15s for the Air Force, had dinner with mayors, spent nights in freezing hangars, and had worked his way through every inch of the airline industry over the last 40 years. He wasn't here to impress. He was here to observe. Kendra rolled her eyes and walked past him without touching the bag. Leonard gave it one more nudge and managed to slide it in himself. A man across the aisle gave him a quick, sympathetic glance, but said nothing. The engines began to hum. The plane was almost ready for takeoff. Leonard sat in 2C, window seat, quiet spot. He placed his hands on his lap and exhaled slowly. His eyes drifted toward the window as the tarmac blurred past. He wasn't angry. Not yet. He was measuring, watching. Kendra returned for the safety demonstration. She skipped his row, didn't offer eye contact, didn't acknowledge him at all. When she got to the exit row, she smiled brightly at a man in a sports jacket and cracked a joke loud enough for everyone nearby to hear. "Oh no, I'm not giving you the safety speech. You look like you've got it all under control," she laughed. Leonard's jaw twitched. Just a twitch. That was it. The plane leveled out at 30,000 feet. Beverage carts rolled down the aisle. Leonard was reading an article on customer loyalty programs in Fast Company when he noticed she skipped him again. "Excuse me," he said, voice calm. "I'd like a coffee, please." Black. Kendra stared at him as if he'd asked her for a foot massage. "Sir, we're very busy. I'll get to you when I can." She snapped, pouring cranberry juice into the glass of the man beside him. That man, a balding software consultant from Palo Alto, judging by the laptop stickers, looked down awkwardly and fiddled with his seatbelt. He didn't want to get involved. Leonard nodded once and returned to his magazine. But he was no longer reading. Not really. His mind was ticking. Not just at the insult, but at the silence. The way the others avoided eye contact. The way it always happened just like this. Quiet, public, casual. The way people like Kendra made it ugly without saying anything outright. He glanced at the seat back in front of him. The airline's logo stared back at him. His airline. His name wasn't on anything yet, but it would be soon. He hadn't announced it widely. Just last month, he'd been appointed CEO of Norjet Airlines, with plans to quietly inspect routes across the country under the radar. No press, no cameras, just real, honest feedback. This was his first test flight, and things were already going very wrong. But Leonard didn't flinch. He watched, listened, and waited, because he had a feeling things were only just getting started. By the time they passed Albuquerque, the mood in first class had shifted. Not dramatically, just enough to notice. Leonard could feel it. It wasn't the turbulence or the dry air. It was the way the flight attendant avoided his row like it was cursed. He sat quietly, listening to the hum of the engines and the occasional clink of glasses from the galley. Kendra had moved down the cabin, laughing with a couple in 1A and 1B, joking about her dog and some reality show. Her voice was warm, her energy was light. But when she turned toward the back of the cabin, her expression dropped like a mask falling. She approached Leonard again, not to serve him, but to address the passenger seated behind him. "Would you like a refill, Mr. Dawson?" she asked sweetly, bending slightly to speak with him. Leonard turned his head slightly. He wasn't trying to eavesdrop, but she made it difficult not to. "Sure," the man said. "Scotch, if you've got it." Kendra laughed. "For you?" "Of course." She turned to walk past Leonard's row, but paused and looked at him. Finally. Her face was flat. "Still waiting for that coffee?" she asked, not kindly, not helpfully, just loud enough for everyone around to hear. "Just want to make sure you're not going to write a complaint about being treated unfairly in first class." Leonard looked up slowly. He didn't raise his voice. "No complaint. Just coffee." Something about his calmness seemed to bother her more than if he'd shouted. She gave a short, forced smile, then walked away without a word. The man in 3A leaned forward and whispered, "That was uncalled for." Leonard turned slightly, met the man's eyes. He appreciated it, but didn't say anything. He'd learned long ago that when you're the only one speaking up, it's easy to be labeled the problem, so he waited. It was then he remembered something his mentor had told him years ago, when he was first climbing the ladder in the airline business. The sky will always reveal who people really are. It's quiet up there. People forget they're being watched. Leonard's eyes scanned the other passengers. Some were watching. Most pretended not to. It was a strange thing, this collective silence, almost like a pact. Everyone saw, but no one wanted to step into it. No one wanted to be the one who said it out loud. Kendra returned about 10 minutes later, holding a small paper cup like it offended her to even carry it. "Here's your coffee," she said, leaning over him awkwardly, letting a few drops splash onto his tray table. "Hope it's strong enough for you." He didn't respond. Then came the real blow. "I don't mean to offend you," she said, too loudly again. "But you're not exactly the usual type we get in this section. You sure you're on the right ticket?" The cabin went still. Even the man in 1B stopped typing on his laptop. Leonard raised his eyes. "What type do you usually get?" he asked. Calm, but direct. Kendra looked taken aback. Then defensive. "Business travelers, executives, not—" She stopped herself, just saying, "Some people think they can upgrade themselves or lie about their seat." "I didn't lie," Leonard said. "You can check my boarding pass." "I already did," she said quickly, "just trying to make sure no one's getting special treatment." Her words were sharp, but Leonard heard what she really meant, and he could see it written across her face. She wasn't used to people like him in a place like this, and the more he stayed composed, the more it unbalanced her. He leaned back, letting her finish her monologue. He didn't need to defend himself, because what she didn't know, and what he wasn't quite ready to reveal yet, was going to change everything. But just as Leonard settled back in, something told him this woman wasn't done yet, and whatever she had left in her, he was about to see it. The plane had just begun its descent over the rugged terrain near Bakersfield. Flight attendants were starting their final checks, and passengers were settling into that quiet, sleepy phase where most people mentally prepare for landing. But Leonard could feel it building, something in the air, not just cabin pressure. It was the way Kendra kept glancing in his direction every few minutes. Not openly, just enough, like she was looking for a reason. Leonard removed his glasses and rubbed his eyes. He wasn't tired, he was calculating. He had hoped this flight would offer insight into how his employees treated everyday passengers. What he got instead felt like a performance, except now the performance was turning hostile. She passed again, collecting empty cups and wrappers. When she reached his row, Leonard calmly offered his used napkin and cup. She stared at them like he'd handed her trash from the sidewalk. "I'm not your maid," she snapped. The woman in 1A audibly gasped. Leonard blinked slowly. Again, not angry, but something shifted in his posture. He placed the items gently on the edge of his tray and looked at Kendra directly for the first time since boarding. "I believe that's your job, ma'am. Flight attendant, you serve the cabin," he said evenly. Kendra flushed, red rising up her neck. It wasn't the response she wanted. She expected outrage or silence, but his measured words, spoken with calm and authority, cornered her. "I don't like your tone," she said. "I haven't raised it." "I don't care who you think you are," she hissed. "You people think you can act like you own the place." Leonard tilted his head. "What do you mean, you people?" That was the moment everything cracked. The words weren't even fully out of his mouth when Kendra's hand came down, fast, open palm, sharp across the left side of his face. It made a sound, not deafening, but clear enough to stop conversation in rows 1 through 5. The man in 2A stood halfway out of his seat. A woman in the 3rd row gasped so loudly it startled the person next to her. A phone was already up. Recording. Kendra froze. Her eyes went wide. Her hand hovered in mid-air for just a second before she dropped it, realizing what she'd done. Leonard didn't move. He didn't touch his cheek. He just looked at her, and in that moment, her expression changed, from rage to panic. Passengers were murmuring now. Several stood. One of the other flight attendants, a younger woman with curly dark hair and a calm demeanor, rushed forward from the back. "What the hell just happened?" she whispered to Kendra, pulling her aside. Kendra tried to speak, but her mouth was dry. "He was being rude," she muttered, almost choking on the words. Leonard finally rose, slowly. He adjusted the cuff of his sleeve and turned toward the commotion behind him. A man recording with his phone called out, "Did anyone else see that? She hit him. She just slapped him." The younger flight attendant stepped between them. "Sir," she said to Leonard, "are you all right?" "I'm fine," he said, finally reaching for a napkin and dabbing the edge of his mouth where a small cut had opened. Kendra looked pale now, like the color had been drained out of her. She started to speak, but the other attendant cut her off. "Go to the galley. Now!" Kendra didn't move. "I said go," the attendant repeated, firmer this time. "Right now!" Kendra finally turned and walked away, shoulders stiff, arms locked at her sides. Leonard sat back down slowly. Every eye in the cabin was on him. One of the passengers leaned in. "Sir, do you want to press charges?" Leonard looked ahead, then at the logo on the headrest. "No," he said, "but this isn't going away." But while the cabin quieted, one voice began to whisper from the back. Someone had recognized him, and that quiet truth was about to shift the entire flight's direction. The voice came from row 5. A woman in her mid-30s, wearing a charcoal pantsuit and reading glasses, leaned over to the man beside her and whispered, "That's Leonard Mayfield." He raised an eyebrow. "Who?" She looked stunned. "Leonard Mayfield. He was just announced last month as the new CEO of Norjet. I read about it on LinkedIn. He's an Air Force vet, been in the industry for decades. That man's not just any passenger." Word traveled fast, faster than the plane descending toward the Bay Area. Within seconds, the whisper had passed from row to row like a spark on dry leaves. A few people pulled out their phones and searched his name. And there it was, his photo on Norjet's website. The familiar face. The exact man seated in 2C. Passengers began to murmur louder now, a mixture of shock, embarrassment, and regret. The man in 1B stood slowly, then turned toward Leonard. "Sir," he said, clearing his throat. "Is that true?" Leonard didn't respond right away. He was still looking ahead, calm, composed. But when he finally turned to the man, he gave a quiet nod. "Yes," he said, "I am." The silence that followed was thick. Not heavy, but meaningful. Even the captain's voice over the speaker seemed to carry a different weight now. "Ladies and gentlemen, we'll be beginning our final descent into San Francisco International. Flight crew, prepare for landing." Kendra had not returned to the cabin. She remained in the galley, hiding. Maybe crying. Maybe trying to piece together how fast things had gone wrong. The younger flight attendant, name tag reading Nora, came back to Leonard, crouching gently beside his seat. Mr. Mayfield, she said softly. I'm really sorry. I didn't know who you... That's all right, Leonard replied. You treated me with respect before you knew my name. That's what matters. Her cheeks flushed. She bit her lip, nodded once, and said, We'll be reporting what happened. He looked her in the eye. Don't report it because of who I am. Report it because it was wrong. Across the aisle, phones were still recording. People weren't just curious anymore. They were invested. And the story wasn't about a CEO now. It was about how fast power dynamics shift when identities are revealed, about how much weight a title suddenly carries after you've been mistreated without it. A man in the back shouted forward, We're with you, Mr. Mayfield. That wasn't right. And that seemed to open the floodgates. People started speaking up, voicing what they had seen, what they had felt, but were too hesitant to express earlier. She ignored him for most of the flight. She poured my drink and skipped his. I heard what she said about you people. Clear as day. It wasn't a mob. It wasn't a witch hunt. It was truth bubbling to the surface, a truth that had sat quietly until it couldn't anymore. Leonard didn't stand up to make a speech. He simply sat there, letting the moment breathe. There was nothing performative about it, no grand gesture, just presence, dignity, the kind of quiet control that doesn't need noise to be noticed. The plane touched down smoothly. Passengers remained seated, not out of protocol, but out of something closer to respect. As they taxied to the gate, Kendra reappeared. She looked shaken. No trace of arrogance. Her face was pale, her lips tight. Leonard looked up at her, briefly. She opened her mouth to speak, but said nothing. She just stood there, frozen. The gate door opened. A pair of airline supervisors and a security officer were already waiting at the entrance. Nora approached them first, speaking quickly, gesturing toward the cabin. Then she motioned gently toward Leonard. He rose from his seat, stepped into the aisle. As he walked past Kendra, he stopped. Looked her in the eyes. I won't be making a scene, he said quietly. But this will be addressed. Not just by me. The company will hear about it. She nodded slowly, but the look in her eyes said she was only beginning to understand the weight of what she'd done. But the real reckoning wouldn't happen at the gate. It would begin after the story left the plane, and the internet wasn't going to stay quiet. The moment Leonard stepped off the plane, everything changed. Two supervisors in navy blue Norjet uniforms approached him near the jet bridge. Both looked tense but respectful. The taller one, a black man in his early 40s with a badge clipped to his belt, spoke first. Mr. Mayfield, sir, we were notified mid-flight. I'm Alan Ricks, Regional Operations Director. First, I want to personally apologize for everything that happened on board. Leonard didn't flinch. I'm not here for apologies, Alan. I'm here for accountability. The other supervisor, a white woman in her late 50s named Terry, her nameplate said so, nodded quickly. Of course. We've already isolated the flight logs and flagged the incident for internal review. And the flight attendant has been removed from duty pending investigation. Make sure it's a real one, Leonard said. Not a PR patch-up. Terry's jaw tensed, but she kept her tone measured. Understood, sir. He wasn't there to micromanage. That wasn't his way. But he had every intention of watching this play out, not from behind a boardroom desk, but from the front line. Down at baggage claim, Leonard retrieved his bag without assistance. No security team, no entourage, just him and the phone in his pocket, which hadn't stopped buzzing. Videos from the plane were already online. One had hit 2 million views within the hour. The caption read, "Flight attendant slaps black passenger in first class. Didn't know he was the CEO." The comments were explosive. Some praised Leonard's restraint. Others tore Kendra apart. And a smaller but loud group questioned everything, accusing the video of being staged, manipulated, or exaggerated. That didn't bother Leonard. He knew the truth. He also knew that people would believe what they wanted. What mattered was that this moment was too public to ignore. Norjet had spent years branding itself as a forward-thinking, inclusive airline. Now it had a full-blown firestorm on its hands. By the time he reached his hotel in downtown San Mateo, He'd already been contacted by 3 national news outlets, 2 major podcasts, and a popular talk show host. He didn't answer. Not yet. He needed time to think. Instead, he called a private meeting that evening with Norjet's internal ethics committee. No PR heads, no corporate lawyers, just the people responsible for policies, training, and internal reporting. The mood was heavy when the Zoom call started. One woman from HR, a Latina in her 60s named Maritza, was visibly shaken. "Mr. Mayfield," she began, "I don't know what to say. I saw the footage, and it broke something in me." Leonard didn't blink. "Then we need to fix what's broken. Not with statements. With systems." He didn't rant. He laid it out clearly. How unconscious bias training had become a checkbox. How too many complaints never reached the right desks. How frontline employees were left to carry bad habits developed in a broken culture. And how silence, especially in first class, was the most dangerous part of it all. "I wasn't hurt by a slap," he told them. "I've taken worse hits in fighter jets. What hurt was watching 20 people sit in silence while someone felt entitled to humiliate me. And I don't blame them. I blame us for building a system where it feels safer to look away." There was no reply for a moment. Then someone cleared their throat. "We'll get to work immediately," Maritza said. Leonard ended the call without ceremony. Meanwhile, back at the airport, Kendra Whitlow was being escorted through a side hallway toward the employee terminal. Her face was flushed, her badge removed. A senior HR officer informed her that she was suspended until further notice. Kendra didn't speak. She didn't cry. She just walked slowly, like she was moving through something she never expected to touch her life. She wasn't thinking about Leonard Mayfield. She was thinking about the videos, the comments, the way everything she'd worked for had crumbled in less than a day. Not because of one action, but because of a pattern that finally caught up. But while one story ended on the tarmac, another was just beginning in living rooms, boardrooms, and airports across the country. By the following morning, Leonard Mayfield's name was everywhere. The headlines were blunt. CEO assaulted on flight by employee. Flight attendant suspended after attacking airline exec. Black airline CEO mistaken for wrong kind of passenger. But none of the coverage captured what mattered most to Leonard. Not really. He wasn't looking for outrage. He wasn't seeking revenge. What kept him up that night in his hotel room wasn't the slap. It was what the slap represented. 1,000,000 tiny slights that had gone unnoticed. Or worse, accepted. The press finally reached out directly. A reporter from the San Francisco Chronicle, an older journalist with a steady voice, called to ask if Leonard would give a comment. He paused for a long time before answering. "Yes?" he said. "But I'm not talking about me. I'm talking about the people who go through this every day with no camera watching and no title to back them up." They met at a local coffee shop. No PR team, no fancy setup. Just a quiet corner table and Leonard's calm, deliberate words. The story ran that evening, not as a scandal, but as a challenge. When titles don't protect you, a CEO reflects on what happens when they do. In the article, Leonard talked about growing up in Oklahoma City, where he was taught to never raise his voice in public. How his mother used to tell him, "They already see you before you walk in. Don't give them something to point at." He talked about flying combat missions, about sleeping in hangars, about earning his place in boardrooms that weren't built with him in mind. And then he said something that struck a nerve. If I, as CEO, can be treated like a fraud in first class, what's happening to the people without a title? What happens to the ones who can't speak back without losing their job, their peace, or their dignity? The article went viral, not for drama, but for its honesty. Thousands of people started sharing their own stories. Quiet humiliations, comments brushed off, a steward looking the other way, a tone that changed based on what someone wore or what seat they sat in. At Norjet headquarters, things moved fast. Leonard didn't just issue a memo, he overhauled the internal complaint system, created an anonymous reporting process where even passengers could submit feedback with guaranteed follow-up. Most importantly, he implemented something he called Seat Check, a program that required flight attendants to rotate cabins, so they couldn't fall into comfort zones or selective behavior patterns. Internally, some pushed back, said it was too much, too fast. Leonard looked them in the eye and said, "Too fast compared to what? The speed of disrespect?" Meanwhile, Kendra's face had become an unfortunate symbol. She was trending for the wrong reasons. An older video surfaced, 2 years prior, where she was seen speaking harshly to a young Latino boy flying alone. The dots connected. This wasn't a one-time slip. It was a pattern. Her termination came quietly. Leonard didn't issue a public statement about her. He didn't need to. He'd already said what mattered. A few days later, at an industry conference in Phoenix, he stood in front of a crowd of airline executives. Most expected a speech full of strategy, metrics, vision. Instead, he told a story. He told them about Flight 1627 from Dallas to San Francisco. He described the quiet looks, the ignored requests, the moment a hand came down on his face not because of anything he did, but because of what someone believed he was. And then he said this: "I didn't want to be seen as the CEO on that flight. I wanted to be seen as a man with a ticket, a body with tired bones, someone deserving of respect. If we can't guarantee that to every person boarding our planes, then we're failing at the most basic part of this business, human decency." The room was still. Then came the applause, not the kind that echoes, but the kind that sits heavy. Reflective. A wake-up call. Outside the conference hall, a young black employee approached him. Nervous, smiling. "Mr. Mayfield," she said. "I saw the video. What you did, how you handled it, that gave me hope." He smiled gently. "Thank you. Now hold the door open for someone else. Because sometimes justice isn't loud. Sometimes it's quiet change that ripples through people's hearts long after the headlines fade. If this story moved you, share it with someone who needs to hear it. And don't forget to subscribe for more true-to-life stories that challenge, heal, and make us better." 2 weeks passed. The frenzy around the incident had started to cool, as all viral stories eventually do. Social media moved on to something newer, flashier, louder. But for Leonard Mayfield, the silence wasn't a relief. It was a reminder. He didn't want this to be another story that burned hot and faded fast. He didn't want people to remember the slap and forget the conversation. So he got back to work. He returned to Norjet's main office in San Bruno, an old concrete building that hadn't changed much since the early 2000s. No red carpet, no press. Just Leonard walking through the same back entrance he'd used years ago as a junior analyst. A few staff members peeked through the glass panels of their cubicles. He felt their eyes, but not out of fear. It was respect. And maybe something deeper. Relief, because they'd seen too many leaders stay quiet when it mattered. Leonard didn't. Inside his office, he pulled out a manila folder. In it were printed copies of nearly 200 emails, all from customers, staff, and former employees sharing similar stories. Some were just a paragraph. Others ran pages long. A woman who'd worked at a regional airport for 22 years wrote that she'd been passed over for promotions 5 times, despite training the men who got them. A retired flight attendant described being disciplined for raising her voice about a colleague who openly mocked passengers with accents. There were letters from pilots, gate agents, janitors. Different cities, different faces. Same thread. Leonard closed the folder and sat in silence for a moment. He knew what had to come next. The following Monday, Norjet launched something new. The listening line. It wasn't a hotline for complaints. It was a bridge. Open 24/7. Anonymous or not. Employees could speak freely, knowing that their words wouldn't vanish into a void. They would be read, reviewed, acted upon. Some critics rolled their eyes, called it another corporate gesture. But Leonard didn't care. This wasn't about optics. It was about making sure no one had to sit in seat 2C again, thinking they were alone. Around that same time, Kendra Whitlow's lawyer released a brief statement. She was devastated by what had occurred and was seeking help for underlying stress and behavioral issues. Leonard read it once. He didn't respond publicly. Instead, he sent one short internal memo. Dignity is not earned by title. It's owed to every human being. That's the culture we're building here. Later that week, he visited one of Norjet's busiest training centers in Albuquerque. He walked in unannounced, greeted the team personally, and sat in the back of a session on customer service. When it ended, he asked to speak. I know it's easy to pretend that some things don't happen, that bias isn't real, that we're all just too busy to notice. But I've sat in that seat. And if it can happen to me, it can happen to anyone. He didn't scold. He didn't grandstand. He talked like a man who had carried bags, written policy, flown planes, and felt shame. All in one lifetime. The kind of leader who made people want to do better. Afterward, a young woman named Jasmine caught him by the coffee machine. You ever think about just walking away from all this? She asked. After what happened? Leonard smiled. I thought about it. Then I remembered. Change only happens when someone stays in the room long enough to fix what broke. He left Albuquerque that night without fanfare. Just a small suitcase and a quiet sense of purpose. Somewhere over Arizona, staring out the window into the clouds, he let his eyes close for a few minutes. For the first time since the flight, he allowed himself a breath that wasn't weighed down. He hadn't fixed everything. Not yet. But he'd made a start. And maybe, just maybe, that was enough for now. But stories like Leonard's aren't just meant to be watched. They're meant to wake us up, to what we allow, to what we ignore, and to what we're willing to speak up for when no one's recording. If this story made you pause, made you think, or made you feel something, share it. And don't forget to subscribe for more true human stories that challenge how we treat each other and what we stand for when no one else does.